So in light of all the excitement this morning, I've decided to write my sermon in form of rap, just so that every musical genre could be represented this morning. Some of you might believe that, but I really didn't. Next year. A friend of mine, fellow pastor in Minnesota, Danielle, posted this last week on her Facebook page just a simple question to our friends. She said, "What are you afraid of? What makes you fearful?" And honestly, for me, Facebook isn't always the most honest place that I encounter in our world. But what surprised me was how deeply transparent people were about their fears. People wrote things like, "I fear being abandoned. I fear Alzheimer's. I fear dementia. I fear death. I fear darkness. I fear being alone. I fear harm to my children or grandchildren. I fear losing my parents. I fear the climate crisis. I fear more isolation. I fear chronic health issues, leading others away. I fear the economic instability right now. I fear medical debt, rejection, alienation, humiliation. I fear my kids' addiction. I fear losing people I love. I fear having a lack of autonomy as I grow older. I fear losing my freedom to love who I love. I fear people bullying my kids and grandkids. And I fear failure." Right? These are just about 25 of the 250 responses to that question. Now, I think often, right, when we think about Christmas, we don't think about fear. But yet in this story, fear permeates throughout. So much so that as each person within the story is encountered by the divine, one of the first things the divine says to them is, "Hey, don't be afraid. Fear not." So, what if saying Merry Christmas was just another way of saying don't be afraid? Scott Erickson, in his book, Honest Advent, from where we stole this theme for the year, offers this question as a way of shifting our narrative out of the routine ways in which we say Merry Christmas, just like a passing moment. But what if in our heart, what if our intention was just to say to people, don't be afraid. Merry Christmas. You don't have to fear. There's a lot of chaos in our world. Merry Christmas. Indeed, Advent is a time when we remember the Christ child entering the world anew. And if that's true, then Merry Christmas is at its core a way of saying, don't be afraid. It's a way of offering to one another the kingdom of God is near, and we're invited to be co-creators of love and justice in this world. Now, this week I had a new fear. And fear is not my go-to. I'm not a very fearful guy. In fact, in times when I should be afraid, I'm not, which isn't necessarily healthy either, right? But I got a call from my dad early this week, and he said, "Listen, your mom's really sick, and she has been for 3 weeks." I could subplot that for you in my head, but I won't. And we're not really sure what to do. And so my brother and sister and I started this journey with my dad about trying to understand what was going on and how this goes. And my mom's never been in a hospital before, right? She's 74. She's great health. She looks like she's in her 50s. She's wonderful. And it was that moment of, oh crap, this wasn't how we expected Christmas to go, right? They were planning to fly out here January 1st. And so plans shifted, life changes. My sister and brother and I have never been on a three-way call in 44 years of my life until this week. And then we had to have a conversation with our parents that if you would have asked me last week, I would have never expected to have, right? About plans and what are you going to do and how are we taking care of this and how can we come alongside you and what does all that mean? There's a lot of uncertainty, right? That's what fear does. Fear takes our brain like a snow globe and shakes it, and everything becomes a little bit cloudier. It's this powerful emotion, and it has a lot of power to either drive us to anxiety or stress or irrational thinking. It can help us assess what's most essential in a moment too, though, right? That space can be wait, church doesn't matter, Christmas Eve doesn't matter, my mom's in a hospital, I'm making different plans, right? It shifts your priorities. And it can divide us. We've seen that a lot in the last year and a half. It can cause us to perceive danger in abnormal ways where we begin to understand others as our enemy even when they're not, that they just are encountering fear differently than we are. So like last week, when I experienced a lot of uncertainty and fear, we're living in a time that has a lot of uncertainty. Through the pandemic, through other illnesses, through the financial stuff happening, through the wars going on all over. And fear can kind of become an infection that permeates everything and everyone around us. And I think every Advent, we're actually invited to wrestle with fear. See, before there are glad tidings of great joy, and even an inkling that love is incarnate among us, we're invited to not be afraid. I wonder if the same is true in our time. In order for us to birth a new kingdom where peace and love and justice reign, we're going to have to step through our fears. To embrace the courage of that moment and step through, and instead of embracing the fear and allowing it to be the thing that governs and rules and engages our every decision, that it becomes the thing that we step through and we say, in light of this, then what? See, we need to notice in the midst of our fear where love is with us. It's one of the things last week that helped me step through the fear for a moment, right? It's just wake up and say, okay, Rustin, wait a second. Your sister lives 6 blocks from your mom. She's way more responsible than you are. Take a deep breath. Your brother has a lot of freedom. He's a tattoo artist. He can go just there and do his thing, and he can be with them really quickly. Okay, take a deep breath. And hey, you know all that church stuff that you do, it's not as important as you think it is. Take a deep breath. And then as we got on the phone and talked with each other, and I don't know if your family is different, but us as siblings, might be as different as you come, right? On every aspect of our existence. And yet as we got on the phone, love brought us together. It gave clarity, and my strengths rose when my strengths needed to rise, and my sister's strengths rose when they needed to rise, and my brother's strengths rose when they needed to rise, and we each made room for each other because love. We have to open our hearts to love in the midst of fear. And that's hard sometimes. I don't know about you, but I'm human. And in each of our lives, We all carry various fears. The fear of not being needed, the fear of losing our abilities, the fear of dementia and forgetting, the fear of being forgotten, the fear of messing up, the fear of the climate, the fear of the future, the fear that we're in a wrong relationship, the fear that we're not investing in the relationships we have, the fear that even though we're putting in a ton of effort, things still aren't changing, the fear that things are changing way too quickly, the fear that things are not the way that I dreamt them to be. So what fear are you carrying? Scott Erickson, the writer of this book that we're engaging in, has curated a liturgy. And the liturgy is called the Liturgy of Not Giving Up. And just December 8th, he performed it at the Inian Theater in Concord. And in this show and in this liturgy, he offers 3 ways to combat giving up on yourself because of fear. And he engages them kind of as mantras, like things we need to repeat to ourselves, things we need to remember. If you go back to Tim's sermon last week about these breath prayers, maybe these are the things you're inhaling. Number 1, I'm on my way. I'm on my way. I'm not who I'm going to be, but I'm on my way there. I'm a contribution. I have something to offer. God created me to impact the situation differently. I'm a contribution. And I'm a resurrection. See, fear keeps us from trying. It tells us that we're not worthy enough. You can almost imagine Mary in that room as the angel comes to her and is giving this message that she's like, why the heck would you choose me? Why me? Right? It's one of the first responses of our imagination that fear like lofts into us. Fear tells us we're not good enough. It tells us that if we try, we're going to fail. It tells us that we need to compete. It tells us that there are too many limited resources and we don't have enough. So we can't forget that fear tells a story too. But it doesn't have to be our story. So the question begins to be, what is the story that I believe? Do I believe the story fear is telling me? Or do I believe the story that love's communicating? And each time the noise gets loud and louder, and fear preys on our vulnerabilities and our insecurities. So we have to quiet those thoughts and remind ourselves, mantra ourselves into understanding that I'm on my way, that I have something here in this moment. It offers compassion and grace. The story of love offers grace and compassion to know that we're learning along the way. And I may mess some stuff up. Mark it down. I will mess some stuff up. And you will too. But it's not the end. Sometimes we fear that we're not where we think we're supposed to be, based on how others in our circumstances are navigating their world. Or we scroll on social media, or we talk in a small group and we hear about so-and-so's grandchild doing this, and you start thinking, well, why doesn't my grandchild do that? We romanticize ideas of people and families and marriages because we see these images pervade through social media that, man, they look like they got it all together. Let me just be clear to you, they don't. It's a lie. It's a way that they're all trying to remember that they're on their way too. We fear that our version of belonging might be insignificant. Church, each of us is on our way. And we're also a contribution, right? Each of us has gifts to offer, gifts that only we can contribute. So our invitation this Advent is to be honest about what our gift is and offer it into our neighborhood, in our world, in our family, and in our community. We don't need to be afraid that our gift is insufficient, because what you have to offer, your talent, your perspective, your story, your love, it's sufficient. Because God gave it to you. Think about this. The energy that holds the whole world into being is the same energy that courses through you and gave you your gift. It's the same energy that empowers and engages you. Now, if you don't know anything about Scott Erickson, he's a painter, and he makes these really beautiful prints. And I've been looking at this print over and over this last week. It's a painting of two lungs with a spinal column between them. And so it has this column with these two lungs that kind of looks like two trees without leaves on them branching out. And on one side, it says YH, and on the other side, it says WH. Just like Tim's sermon last week, Yahweh, Yahweh. We learned through Tim last week and through Father Richard Ward that our very breath is the name of God, that energy that courses through us with every inhale and exhale that empowers us at the very core of our being. God permeates us in all pieces of who we are. So each breath is a resurrection. In each breath, there is new life that we draw upon. We're on our way. We have stuff to contribute that God gave us, but we are also a resurrection. See, if you hear nothing today, hear this. Resurrection and new life are possible. See, this is the promise that God makes through Mary on that beautiful day that even she didn't understand. He offered a resurrection through her fear. Right? He comes in fear and he says, don't be afraid. I've got so much more on the other side of that fear. If you stop at the fear, you're missing the resurrection. I've got so much more for you on that other side. So much that she didn't even understand that 35 years later, this child that she loved and would be soon holding in her arms and watching it breathe would be on a cross. And still, resurrection would come. There's people in this room who understand what it's like to watch your kid die. It sucks. Nobody should have to watch it. And resurrection is real. See, if we step back from the fear, we can see the invitation. We can see the possibility that we are each an incarnation. In this moment, we are living vessels of God's love, and it's not too late to love. We don't have to give up, no matter what the world tells you, no matter what the fear in the back of your brain is telling you. We can choose belief over fear. Aging is not for the faint of heart. Marriage and relationships are not for the faint of heart. Divorces, not for the faint of heart. Having kids or choosing not to have kids, not for the faint of heart. Surviving divorce, not easy. Unknown growths growing in your body, messy. Treatments with uncertain timelines, horrible. The loss of loved ones, unthinkable. But one thing is guaranteed. And there's one thing that all of us share in common. Here's a fact for you. We're all going to die. Didn't think you were going to get that Christmas message, did you? We are. We're going to die. I don't know when that day is, but it's guaranteed. If we live in fear of that day, it doesn't make it come any faster or slower. If we live in fear of that day, it doesn't actually mean we live more meaningfully. However, if we can begin to metabolize the truth that no matter our age, no matter our circumstances, no matter our lot in life, that we can offer love and receive love, and we can each be transformed by God's love and light, then we can be the resurrection in some really messy moments in our world, in our homes, in our work, in our communities. So on this fourth Sunday of Advent, we recognize it's messy, but resurrection's possible. A beloved community is possible where everyone is cared for and poverty and hunger and hatred are no longer. It is possible. And it's already underway. See, this beautiful baby proclaims loud and clear that God has made a way. And that God is continuing to make a way through us. And that we're reconciled no matter our fear. Right? Jesus, it's all done. You actually can't mess it up. You worried about that? Worried to mess up? You can't. No matter how messy and broken and all of that, you can't mess it up because grace won. It's not gonna win, it already did. And so we stand as resurrected people in the midst of our own graves, proclaiming Christ's love. So church, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Please pray with me. God, that's easy to say. And yet we're a community that's afraid. So push us through our fears. Awaken us to love on the other side. In your holy name we pray.